And just want to say hello to everybody and thank you for coming to this session. If you have questions or comments of a clarifying nature, drop them into the chat and I'll hopefully see them pop up and respond in real time. And then we can open it up for a broader discussion afterwards. This is the very first time I've actually presented this work. And so we'll see how this goes. This is a brand new slide deck and a brand new presentation, but I did write a book, so hopefully I know something about what I'm talking about. To begin, what am I trying to do with this book? What message am I trying to deliver? I am trying to say that the way we teach management, the way we treat management, business management in the world today is broken. It's wrong. The system, and I'll show you reasons why, is broken. And instead of teaching business students how to fix the system, my concern, and it's not just mine, Joseph Stiglitz has been writing about this, we're teaching business students how to exploit a broken system. And as long as we keep doing that, we're going to have worse and worse problems until we're going to have to be faced with a crisis to do something about it. And so I want to prod business schools to rethink how they teach management, recognizing that this is an inertial object. It's going to change slowly. And so really what I'm doing in this book is telling business students, your education is incomplete. Take control of your education and augment it where it's necessary to prepare you for the kind of challenges you're going to face in the world today. There's what I'm trying to do with the book. I'm trying to instill the idea of management as a calling or a vocation. What that does is it challenges students to look inside themselves and say, what kind of a business manager do I want to be? What kind of a legacy do I want to leave? Rather than how can I make as much money as I can? And that changes the kinds of questions you ask, the kind of focus you have in your career. There's the gist. There's what I'm trying to do. Now I'll try and give you a sense of how I'm trying to do it. Let me go to slide format. There we go. Okay. So I want to begin with two stories. If you're not familiar with this face, this is Bernie Ebbers. And when I started at the University of Michigan in 2004, Bernie Ebbers had just been sentenced to prison. It was the largest accounting fraud in history. And he was going to jail for, I believe, 25 years. And it was interesting to me because I got to the business school and no one was talking about it. And I found that very strange. Here was a guy who built a company from nothing. He was what we would want all our business students to become, a successful entrepreneur, building a company that employed people, that provide a service, that really was a force within the business world. And now he was in disgrace. And no one was talking about it. And then at one point, I got on the elevator. No one really knew who I was. I was brand new at the University of Michigan. I'm standing in the back, and there were two senior professors in front of me. They didn't really notice that I was there. And one finally turned to the other and said, "What do you think of that sentence of Bernie Ebbers?" And the other one said, "I think it's ridiculous. It's not like he killed somebody." I've always thought about that because that, to me, highlights the extent to which we do not hold business executives responsible for misplacing the trust we put in them. Business people have tremendous power, and yet we don't assign to them the responsibility that comes with that power. I think what Bernie Ebbers did was like he killed somebody. He put thousands of people out of work. He destroyed people's retirement accounts. He drove the stock to like $2 in less than a day. I mean, people were out of work. They were unemployed. Their retirement future in jeopardy. He did serious damage to many people's lives, and he did serious damage to the trust that people have in business to actually provide for society and not looking out for themselves. So there's story number one. Here's story number two. This is Fritz Henderson. He was the CEO of General Motors when the federal government took over General Motors to help them avoid bankruptcy. They were on the brink, and the federal government pumped money into General Motors, basically took it over. People joked that it was government motors. And they put Fritz Henderson as sort of a placeholder CEO. And the C-suite pretty much knew that their time was limited, that the government was going to ask Fritz to leave. And when they were asking him to leave, the entire C-suite was going to ask to leave with him. And so they were all looking for parachutes. They were all looking for ways to bail out. And one of them was interviewing at the University of Michigan. And he was talking with different people about getting a lectureship position at the University of Michigan. And he sat down with me to talk about a job at the University of Michigan. And he said something in that conversation that, again, I never forgot. He said, with a bright smile on his face, he said, you know, I've been at General Motors for 25 years. And I have to tell you, I had a ball. And I found that really strange and really tone deaf. Here was a guy in the driver's seat that almost destroyed General Motors, almost brought him to bankruptcy, and had to get bailed out by the federal government, and he had a ball. It's almost like a doctor operating on your mother or father, coming out of the operating room saying, I almost killed your parent. Someone else came in to fix my mistakes and bring your parent back to life, but I had a ball in that operation. Again, this story speaks to me about the extent to which business people themselves don't even hold themselves responsible for the power that they have. And I think both of these signal a problem we have for how we think about the role of business in society, the role of the business manager in society. If you think about it, if you understand the history of the business school, its original intent was to teach the titans of industry how to manage commerce in service to society. The idea was to teach business managers in the same spirit we teach doctors and lawyers, with a Hippocratic oath to serve society. And we've drifted from that mandate. We've drifted from that call. And we need to get that back because capitalism is in crisis. This is not my words. These are other people's words. These are not people outside the market. These are people inside the market. Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate in economics, says capitalism is in need of being saved from itself. Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever, says capitalism is a damaged ideology that needs to be reinvented. I can go down the list. Andy Grove, Intel co-founder, says this moment in the market's history is a strategic inflection point. There are serious problems with the market. There are serious problems with capitalism as it is now used. I am not about to make an argument for socialism. I'm about to make an argument for we need to fix capitalism and get it back on the right track. And we in business schools have a role to do that. These people outside the market are warning us. In fact, Joseph Stiglitz has been writing that the way we teach business today is we're teaching students how to exploit a broken system. We're teaching exploitive capitalism. We can't keep doing that. We have to teach students how to fix the system, how to manage it, how to be stewards of the system. That's what I want to focus on, not a call for socialism or something like that, and I'll get into that. These critiques are not just coming from people in business, they're coming from our own ranks. If you've not read these, I encourage you to read them. They're scathing indictments. James Benjamin is an MIT Sloan MBA student, and Sam Long, who wrote the second article, is a Harvard Business School MBA student. And both of them just shred the business school curriculum. Elite business schooling is tailored to promote two types of solutions to the big problems that arise in society, either greater innovation or freer markets. Proposals other than what's essentially more business are brushed aside, and the curriculum stifles discussion of the common good while emphasizing the overriding objective of profit maximization as unquestioned. At the bottom, American business schools produce a business elite dominated by financiers and their squires, presiding over a disordered economy, gutted of both its productive energy and the ability to generate mass productivity. These are really powerful arguments written by students that we are teaching. And so I think we have numerous critics coming forward to say, we've got to step in because capitalism is in crisis. There are two problems that stand out to me as problems that the market is causing and the problem seems unable to fix. Problems in the natural environment, climate change, problems in the social environment, income inequality. And Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, says both of these issues threaten our democratic values, discourse, and institutions. These can do serious damage to our world and our society. And let me take each in turn. Climate change. You can see up in the upper left, growth in carbon dioxide emissions. There's a dotted line at 1950. You can see that's where the line kinks. And we can do that for a whole host of issues within the natural environment. We can also do that with a whole host of issues within the social environment, whether it's population or fertilizer consumption or paper production or large dams. I can go down the list. This dotted line is where scientists say that we've entered the Anthropocene. We've entered a new geological epoch. This is a working group in the Subcommission on Quaternary Stratigraphy putting forward a proposal that we've entered the Anthropocene. And in the Anthropocene, we have 9 planetary boundaries, which we should not cross if we want to maintain a safe operating system for humans and other life forms. That safe operating system is marked by the green circle in the middle. You can see that we've crossed 3 of them. Climate change, nitrogen cycle. We produce more fixed nitrogen than natural processes. We put it on farm fields. It runs into the aquatic ecosystem. It causes algae blooms. It causes dead zones. And then biodiversity loss, species extinction. We are blowing the doors off the rate at which we are driving species to extinction. One of these planetary boundaries is in decline, stratospheric ozone depletion. We can address these issues. We've done it with ozone, we can do it with others. And look at some of the others that they're worried about. Ocean acidification. As we increase CO2 in the atmosphere, we're increasing carbonic acid in the ocean, we're acidifying it. Global freshwater use. We've had cities that have been at risk of running out of fresh water. Sao Paulo, Cape Town. Think about it. If you run out of water, you've got a serious problem. You have to leave. What is causing these? Well, Naomi Klein is out there saying it's capitalism versus the climate. There are some that suggest we shouldn't be calling it the Anthropocene, we should be calling it the Capitalocene, because it's capitalism that does this. And both these arguments say that we need to shred capitalism and come up with a new system. I am not a proponent of that idea. We have never in human history have an opportunity to wipe the slate clean and come up with a new set of institutions. Every set of institutions come from those that came before. There's a wonderful essay by Stephen Jay Gould called The Creation Myths of Cooperstown. And we have a myth in the United States that Abner Doubleday invented baseball in Cooperstown, New York in 1896. And what Stephen Jay Gould is pointing out is that's preposterous. There was a game that was evolving over time. Abner Doubleday merely wrote the rules down as he saw them, and that became baseball. In a similar way, Adam Smith did not invent capitalism when he wrote his famous book in 1776. He was watching a system evolving in Europe, in England, and he merely wrote down what he saw and analyzed it. And so if we're going to get ourselves out of this situation, we have to look at what we have as capitalism. And I would point out that there are many forms of capitalism. Scandinavian capitalism is different than American capitalism, different than Japanese capitalism, and it's quite malleable. It changes over time, and it can change again. And so to deal with these issues, we need to start to think about addressing capitalism. So crisis in the natural environment. We also have a crisis in the social environment. Economic inequality is reaching epidemic levels, not seen since the Great Depression. The stat in the first bullet point I've used with many people, and this came from the Federal Reserve. Before COVID, 40% of Americans were unable to pull together just $400 for an emergency. Think about that. They're in that emergency now with COVID. And I would ask anyone, if you were one of these people and you need to put food on the table for your family, what would you do? Anytime I ask that question, the answer is always the same. I would do what I need to do. That should alarm you. That is dangerous. We have record unemployment. While CEO salaries are going through the roof between 2017 and 2018, the median CEO salary increased from that should be $6.3 million to $18.6 million. We are now watching record unemployment while the stock market is booming. Jeff Bezos is poised to become the world's first trillionaire. Something is wrong, something is amiss, and it's not just in the United States. Across the world, the wealthiest 26 people now own as many assets as the poorest 3.8 billion people on the planet. And this is happening in countries around the world where the top 10% of the income earners have increased their portion of the wealth. Look at every one of those countries. Steady upward trend from down 20, 30, 35% up to as much as 55% in India and working way down. The rich are getting richer and that is causing serious problems. How do we solve this? I want to come back to the idea we have to focus on the strongest institution in society for organizing things. There was a time in our world where we looked to the church to address our collective problems and coordinate activities within our society. Then we turned to governments to solve these problems. Now we turn to business. Business is the market is the most powerful institution on earth. Business is the most powerful entity in it. I would go so far as to say that if business isn't solving these problems, they won't be solved. This is just a pragmatic statement. Business builds the buildings we live and work in, provides the food we eat, provides the cars we drive, the drivetrain under the hood, the forms of mobility that will replace that car, the drugs that we enjoy, the extended living lifespan that we enjoy. It all comes from business. And if we're going to solve these problems, we have to turn to business. But the problem with our curriculum is that we are not addressing these issues in a serious way. I would love to see more business ethics courses out there, but I personally don't think a single ethics course dropped in the midst of a curriculum that focuses on a broader set of values around shareholder value, around efficiency, a set of values that are at odds with that one course, that course is not going to have much effect. There have been others who push we should have an MBA oath, much like a Hippocratic oath, to do no harm, to serve the greater good. I like this, but I fear that it's merely virtue signaling. Students get as at the end of their curriculum, they sign it, I'm going to do good, but have they been taught what that means? Have they been taught to think about what they want to do as a business manager? What we need to do, to my mind, is start to teach wisdom. This, if you've never seen this before, the data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid. This is what we do as academics. We take data, we understand relations, and we turn it in for information. We take that information and we analyze patterns. We turn it into knowledge. To turn that knowledge into wisdom, we need to understand principles. And I think this is where business schools fall down. We are afraid often. I talk to colleagues and say, oh, I can't teach values. I can't teach principles. And my answer is you already are. You are teaching that the shareholder is most important. You're teaching that efficiency is always important. Efficiency is always good. If we provide people with cheaper products, that is good. It's efficient. Is it really? You can have a Walmart open up outside town and you will watch Main Street die. You'll watch the small businesses die. And what goes with those small businesses? Civic leadership, tax base, the churches. Everything starts to fall apart, yet people get to buy cheap stuff at Walmart. This is a Faustian deal. And yet we teach that. A colleague of mine puts it, we worship at the altar of efficiency. Efficiency is always good. Efficiency is not always good. And we need to start to think differently about how we teach wisdom, what values we teach. I recently gave a talk on this idea, and I had a professor in the Zoom room, and he said, look, I don't want to teach people how to fix this system. I just want to teach them this is the way it works, and this is what you have to do to succeed. And if we do this, we will continue to have more WorldComs, more Enrons, more Wells Fargo kinds of catastrophes, because as long as people put money first and all of the values second, we will have what James Gamble, a corporate attorney, writes, we'll have more sociopaths. We're creating corporations that are textbook examples of a sociopath. They care only about themselves. They care only about money. The only value that makes sense is making more money. Clearly that is problematic. Clearly that is a road to ruin, and we need to move beyond that. So I want to stop teaching some set of values, and I want to start teaching a different set of values to try and inspire students to reach for greatness, to serve society. And I think they're already there. I think they're way ahead of us, because I think we want to teach management as a calling. I do this with my students, and they really resonate with this. And I use this quote from Mark Twain, which I really like. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And we need to spend more time helping students figure out that second day. Why are they in business? Why are they in business schools? I am trying to put together a program to do this. And the funny thing is, if I think of it as successful, some students will leave business school. It's a funny irony, but there are a lot of students that come to business school for the wrong reasons. They come for money, they come for power, and that can lead us astray. I challenge my students, are you a cormorant? Now, this comes from Herbert Shepard, whose work I really admire, and he opens one of his papers by saying, are you a cormorant? Now, a cormorant is a bird that's really good at catching fish, and the fisherman knows this, and so he puts a band around the bird's neck and a rope around its foot and throws it into the water. And it goes down and gets a fish, comes back up, the fisherman takes it, throws it back into the water. All day, the bird does what it's really good at, but does it for someone else's purposes. It's a cormorant. And I'd ask you, are you a cormorant? I ask my students, are you a cormorant? Are you following an internal set of values? Are you following an entirely external set of values? And if it's the latter, you're a cormorant. There's a bumper sticker way of putting this. You can follow your dreams, or someone will gladly pay you to follow theirs. How are you managing your life? How are you managing your career? William Dershowitz has a book, if you've never seen it, called Excellent Sheep. And he is describing what we're doing in business schools is we're channeling students, because of the values we project that money is so important, into careers they don't want. They're excellent sheep. They're excellent. They're smart, but they're sheep. They're just following what we're putting in front of them. They're following accolades. They're following shiny baubles. And where are they ending up? They're ending up in finance. They're ending up in consulting. Why? Because we are increasingly measuring the value of education by return on investment, and that's where the salaries are greatest. I see it with my own students. They come into the program, they want to make a difference in the world. They're not going to care about salary. And then when it comes to graduation time, they start to look at the salaries put out by consulting firms, $110,000, $150,000, $30,000 signing bonuses, and they start to bend and they start to yield. Peer pressure starts to come in. And then they start to say things like, well, I'm just going to do this for a little while to pay off my debts. And I wish them luck. But I also know that once you get used to that salary, it's very hard to give it up. And then if you get married and you have children, it becomes even harder to give it up. And so once you start down the path, it's very hard to undo it. Some people don't even question it. I have a colleague, Tim Hall, at Boston University, who studies careers. And there was one story he had that I just loved. He was talking to a woman who was a huge success in her field. She had achieved accolades and accomplishments that she never dreamed possible, but she was severely unhappy. And she was trying to figure out why. And she said one day she looked in the mirror and she said, she came to this revelation. She said, oh my God, an 18-year-old picked my career. She set a path at 18, she never looked back. And she started to realize this isn't what I wanted. And she needs to start to rethink it. And so are you a cormorant? Are we teaching students to be cormorant? Are we teaching excellent sheep? Or are we challenging students to discern who they are, what they want to be, what role do they want to have to play in the market, and how are they going to get there? And I would argue that, again, the students are there already, many of them. When I first started teaching in business schools in the mid-90s, students who want to change the world, they went into schools of government and nonprofit management. Now, increasing numbers are coming into schools of business. They see the power of business to influence our world, and they want to use that power to make the world a better place, to leave a legacy. That's what gives me hope, honestly, because without them, I'm not sure we would be able to get where we need to go. So how do we do this? Again, if I had a magic wand and I could change a business school curriculum, I would blow it up and start from scratch. I know that's impractical. People are afraid of dropping in the rankings. They are afraid of innovating. Let's face it, it's a lot of energy to do that, and we're not rewarded for it. I'm a senior professor. I do develop new courses, but I can tell you that the rewards are very low for doing this, because if it takes time away from my research at the end of the year, that's what my annual review looks at. But we still need to do it. And if we don't do it in the business school, I want to encourage the students to do it themselves, to focus on it themselves, and augment their curriculum, expand their curriculum, find ways to do this, whether it's curricular or co-curricular activities, make the education what you need it to be. What do I think we need to do? Well, we have systemic problems. We need systemic solutions. If I'm going to blow up the curriculum, I would start with these ideas. First of all, We need to teach students how to be stewards of the market. We need to teach them to understand, how did the market emerge? How did it evolve? Is it serving our needs? And does it need to be fixed? I actually, in the book, I quote Tucker Carlson, who's a very right-leaning commentary on Fox News, but he has a quote that I really like that captures this. He says, "Capitalism is a tool, like a staple gun or a toaster. You'd be a fool to worship it. Our system was created by human beings for the benefit of human beings. We do not exist to serve markets, just the opposite. Any economic system that weakens or destroys families is not worth having. A system like that is the enemy of a healthy society." So if we can teach students, how did capitalism form? How did it evolve? Why did it evolve? What multiple forms are out there? Again, what is great and not so great about Scandinavian capitalism, American capitalism, Japanese capitalism? How can we start to envision a better capitalism? How do we understand how capitalism changed? You know, you can't price fix, you can't collude. Those are rules within the market. We accept them as true. How do we develop new rules, perhaps around carbon emissions, perhaps around living wages? You can go to Scandinavian countries and see that they have a very strong blend of these kinds of community efforts embedded within the capitalist market. How do we teach students how this came about? How do we teach them to be more philosophical about this? I saw someone put a comment in there about liberal education, and I agree. I think some of the best business education out there, Wake Forest at the undergraduate level, likes to think of itself as business education meets liberal arts. How can we start to bring that in? Jim March, who taught at Stanford, he's dead now, but when he became emeritus, he was given the opportunity to teach anything he wanted. And I asked him, what was it? And with a very, very mischievous smile, he says, "I teach management through the classics." And he said, what's the most important book that students should read? They should read Don Quixote. Why? Because he was a man who invented a world and then started to live it, even while everyone around him was laughing at him. What is that called? That's called an entrepreneur. Think about it. When Elon Musk started Tesla, everyone thought he was an idiot. This is never going to work. And yet he made it so. And now the auto companies are chasing him. I think they're going to catch up. That's a different story. But that is a way we can start to teach business rather than just the tools of business. Why should they apply the tools? Where should they apply them? How should they apply them? We spend very little attention on that second question. And I think we need to change that. So I want to teach students about capitalism, and I would offer as a model for this, Rebecca Henderson at the Harvard Business School teaches a course called Reimagining Capitalism. She started it thinking this would just be a small elective, and it went through the roof. The students were clamoring for it. She has multiple sections of it, now has handed it off to other professors. Students want this content. So there's piece number one. Piece number two, what is the purpose of the firm? What is the purpose of the firm in society? Milton Friedman has dominated the conversation, saying it's there to serve the shareholder. I would argue that that is the product of merely methodological necessity. You run your regression analyses, you meet a variable that says, this is how I measure the success of a firm. Well, share price, there you go. And then somehow the cart started leading the horse, and the shareholder became the number one purpose of the firm. That question is now being asked of, is that accurate? BlackRock, Larry Fink, sent a letter to all the CEOs in which he has a stake, which is a heck of a lot, saying that they have a responsibility to make a positive contribution to society. The Business Roundtable, the World Economic Forum are redefining the purpose of the corporation: to invest in employees, pay your taxes, act as stewards of the environmental and material universe. Now, these are aspirational statements. And as the saying goes, don't trust us, track us. I'm watching closely. Are the firms doing this? Not very well. But these statements were made. And I think we in business schools can step into the debate and say, how do we make that tangible? How do we do something about that? I like to fall back on Peter Drucker's idea of what is the purpose of the firm. He said this back in the 50s. He said, the purpose of the firm is to identify and serve a market. That is society, a segment of society. He went on to say, if the company makes money, that measures how well it is performing that function. But at the end of the day, the success of the firm is measured by how well it serves society. We need to get back to that. That is the role of business. The distrust that people have for business now is drawn from people only care about themselves and about making money. The recent scandals we've had in the United States of it being shown that a lot of companies and a lot of rich people that run those companies have been dodging their taxes. And the damage that does to our trust in our institutions is immeasurable. And so the role that business has in fixing that is huge. A third issue, what is the role of government in the market? What is the role of the market in policymaking? Right now, I am stunned how few business schools teach any courses on lobbying. And I'm disturbed by those that do, how few of them teach the idea of constructive lobbying to make a balanced and sustainable market to serve society. I offer a course, I just started it 2 years ago, called Business and Democracy, Advocacy, Lobbying, and the Public Interest. The course filled up. I had 75 students. It was crossed between the business school and the School of Public Policy. And I asked the students, what do your peers think about you taking these classes? And it was fascinating. The business students said, our peers are asking us, why would you take a course on government? What role does the government have in the market? And I find that really bizarre. The idea that regulation is an unwarranted intrusion in the market is naive and is dangerous. The students in public policy said their peers looked at them and said, you would even set foot in the business school, much less take a course there. Business is the enemy. And those two viewpoints, to me, highlight the problem here. We need to start to rethink the role of government in the market and the role of business in policymaking. There is a constructive role that business can play in informing better policy. And we need to teach that in business schools, and we're not, and we need to change that. So there is another piece that I want to bring in. Third or fourth, pay proper attention to citizenship. I mean, the median starting salary for an MBA student in 2019 was $110,000. The top consulting firms are paying $165,000. Right off the bat, they're on the upper end of the pay scale compared to their peers. In 2018, the median CEO compensation was $18.6 million. Now, to what purpose are students, are business leaders going to put this money? Are they merely going to put themselves into a gated community in Florida, play golf, and care little about the world around them, wall themselves off from the world around them? Or should we be teaching them how to serve on boards, how to do philanthropy, how to set up a philanthropy? How do we bring business leaders in front of them and say, here's how you can do it. Here are models for the way you play citizen within today's society. We don't do that. And I think that's really problematic, because the truth is many CEOs come in, they plan their glide path, 4 years, 5 years. They basically blame the predecessor for everything that went wrong. They reset the books. They try and maximize share price because their bonus is based on that, even if it creates limits to long-term growth. They cash out and they move to Florida or wherever they can live their comfortable life for the rest of their lives. It's not just my words saying that. I just recently did some interviews with Paul Pullman, and he is very dismissive of CEOs that do that. And he finds it to be hollow and empty and not providing value to society. And I think there's a good time to start to rethink, but they're not going to know this if we don't teach them. Next, rethink competition and collaboration. This idea that we worship the idea of free markets and perfect competition. I'm going to begin by saying there is no such thing as totally free markets. There's no such thing as perfect competition. There never has been. Markets are always flawed. Information is not widely distributed. And so how do we think about areas where we might have collaboration? And if you're interested in an interesting approach, this Paul Pullman, after having stepped down as CEO of Unilever, has started something called Imagine. And what his idea is, he's focusing on what's called pre-competitive collaboration. If you can find an industry sector with tight market concentration, you can just get a small number of CEOs into a room together, try and focus on solving issues together. Now, their attorney is standing right behind them to make sure they don't talk about pricing, antitrust. They'll shut it down right away. But if you can get a small number of people to sit together and say, what do we do about a living wage? What do we do about palm oil? What do we do about climate change? If you can get these CEOs to move, You can get a major portion of that sector to move. It will create pressure on others in the sector to move, and it will make policy easier to set. This is companies stepping forward and assuming their role in society in a serious way. So there's another piece. Can we rethink material flows? Can we disconnect material flows from profits? You can see on the left, the idea of disconnecting energy flows from GDP is happening in certain Nordic countries. Can we start to rethink circular economy? Can we start to rethink carbon neutral or even carbon negative? You can't find the right answers if you don't ask the right questions. And if you had asked me 6 or 7 years ago, would people in the corporate sector be talking about carbon neutrality? I would have said, no, this is going to say a theoretical conversation among a bunch of academics. But it has changed, and corporations are thinking about carbon neutrality and are thinking about carbon negative. Microsoft, IKEA, others are really pushing in this direction. And that is a totally different approach here. Reducing carbon emissions is fairly easy. You just make the system more efficient. It's about eco-efficiency. Carbon neutrality, especially if you start to think about your entire supply chain, you have to start to rethink some basic assumptions about how your company operates and what you do. And that is hard, and that is exciting. If you don't ask the right questions, you won't get the right answers. Similarly, can we rethink consumption? Is this a conversation in your business school? Is sustainable consumption possible? If it's not, we're doomed. It's that simple. You can't keep consuming. Population growth has been replaced by consumption as the major threat to our natural environment. When I was born in 1961, the population was 3 billion. The world population was 3 billion. Today, that population is 7.5 billion. So in my short lifetime, the population has more than doubled. That's alarming. But the world GDP has gone up by 7 times, and that is directly related to consumption. If we don't get consumption under control, we are in serious trouble. And so can you start to think about sustainable consumption? Can you start to think about companies like Patagonia saying, don't buy our stuff, buy it used? Can you start to think about repairing rather than replacing? There's a whole movement on the right to repair and laws that say you need to make your products in a way that the average person can repair them. Can you do this? Can we set laws to do this? Can we start to think about degrowth? Is this a conversation we should have in business schools? Yes. Are we having it? No. And how do we rethink that? And then how do we start to think about different metrics? We have the sustainable development goals there, but we could put up against it metrics like gross domestic product. That sends us in the wrong direction in so many ways. GDP goes up if there's a mere movement of any money. And so, for example, I might start my day every day by eating donuts. GDP goes up because I'm buying donuts. And then I have a heart attack and they take me to the hospital. GDP goes up again because I'm paying for that hospital stay. And then I die and GDP goes up yet again because they're paying for my funeral and my gravesite. Now, clearly, some of those are good and some of those are not. And there's a very interesting study by Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz. They did it for the government of France to come up with alternative metrics besides GDP that measure real national health. And you can start to get into some really interesting questions about, are you leaving behind a productive environment for future generations? Are there certain aspects of the economy that are not measured in GDP? For example, if one of a parents stays home to take care of children, GDP actually goes down because they're not being productive, quote unquote, productive within the economy. And clearly that's not true. We can also look at discount rates. They're sacrosanct within business schools. But discount rates inherently discount the future. In fact, if you take just a discount rate of 10%, run a straight line, that says that everything 10 years and beyond is worthless. Is that true? Actually, no. That's called the future. That's called your kids' future. That's called your grandkids' future. But if we use a discount rate, we miss it. Nicholas Stern brought this up when he did his report on the cost of climate change, and he used an extremely low discount rate because he said in certain issues, it's immoral to use discount rates when we're thinking about the future. And economists hammered him, but he stood his ground. And it's a really good question. Yet we teach these in business schools. So we really need to think this through. So these are the kind of questions I'd like to see business schools start to focus on more. And if the business schools don't do it, I want to see students do it themselves because they are hungry for this. In surveys, 88% of business school students think that learning about social and environmental issues in business is a priority. This is in 2014. 2015, 67% of business students want to incorporate environmental sustainability considerations in whatever job they choose. By 2019, business ethics entered the top 5 most popular subjects for the first time. Nearly 25% of incoming students want a job focused on social impact after graduating. 25%, that's a serious number. And nearly 50% want to do so later in their careers. And 97% of young business professionals want a career with purpose. They want their calling, their vocation to fit with business schools, their business career. I would add the second statistic in there is only 33% feel engaged by the work and feel that they do have a purpose in their work, and we need to fix that. So the students are ahead of us. I want to close with a quick story to try and think about the way I try and inspire students to think about this, and I hope I can inspire you to work this into your curriculum, your teaching, your research. I want to show you a picture of my grandparents, and in particular my grandmother. I love this picture. And she was born in 1899 and she died in 1995. Now, I want you to think about the change she saw in her life. She was born into a house without electricity, without running water. And she saw the advent of indoor plumbing, the advent of indoor electrification. She grew up in a house with a horse and carriage. She saw the first car. She saw the first flight. She saw a man land on the moon. She saw the first computer. She saw all this and more. And if I had told her at the age when my students, say 20, 25, this is the world you will die in, she would say, you're crazy. That's never going to happen. If I could show my students today the world they would die in, they would be equally amazed. They would be equally incredulous. They would say, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. And I would argue that the change our students will see will be far more than the change she saw, because the pace of change is accelerating. And so we can spend time trying to think about what the future is going to look like. But a better question to ask our students is, what role do you want to play in making it the world you think it should be? And that's where my students get excited, because at the end of the day, they do see things that we can't see. This quote from William Gibson, I love it. It says, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. Some people can see the future better than others. Young people can see a world of opportunities, or older people see a world of problems. What we do owe them as the older generation, I think of myself as the older generation, is a responsibility to alter the institutions of our society wherever we can to make it possible for them to realize their purpose, to realize their dream. Within business schools, again, quoting from Rakesh Khurana in his book From Higher Aims to Hired Hands, the American Business School was originally founded to train a professional class of managers in the mold of doctors and lawyers to seek the higher aims of commerce and service to society. But it has effectively retreated from that goal, leaving a gaping moral hole at the center of business education and therefore management itself. The time has come to rejuvenate the intellectual and moral training of future business leaders. I would add that he wrote this in 2010. We're making slow progress in the direction. My hope with this book is to speed up that progress and try and drive change. So I put down there at the bottom, if you use Hoffman 20 at Stanford University Press, you can get 20% off the book. So I encourage you to do that. And with that, I will stop sharing and we can have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Many powerful messages in your presentation. Yes, we need to think about those issues, and yes, capitalism doesn't work as we expect. So it's time for you guys to raise your questions. Please, if you have a question, can you put your hand up, and we will go in the pecking order. And while our delegates are trying to summon their thoughts after your session, can I kickstart? Do you have in mind an example of a company that achieves successfully both profits and the positive impact on the society and environment? So can we combine? All right.
You know, this is a great question, and it's a great debate. is there such thing as a sustainable firm? Is there such thing as a sustainable society where we can say, we've done it, we're there? I'm not so sure. And I'm willing to this would be a great debate. Is it possible to get an endpoint and say we're done? I'm personally doubtful. I think that this is going to be a forever challenge. I am exhaling CO2 right now. I am consuming resources. I'm using energy to make this meeting happen. We are a net negative on the environment. Earth First has a bumper sticker. It's totally sarcastic, but it says, save the planet, kill yourself. Obviously, that's not the answer I want to propose, but I think it's going to be a constant challenge, constant striving. That said, asking the right questions, carbon neutrality, Microsoft, carbon negativity, what Patagonia is trying to do with its products. They make them right, they make them well, they make them to last. They have programs to help teach you how to fix them. They encourage you. They've tried to encourage secondary sales of used products. An interesting irony with that, though, is when they first started the Don't Buy This Jacket program, sales went up. And so they're like, oh boy, what happened here? But there are smaller companies that are trying to do this. Patagonia right now is the largest B Corp out there, but there are the smaller B Corps that are trying to do this. And I think B Corps are sort of the incubators, the test labs. Usually it's the big corporations that do the experimenting, but I think when it comes to these kinds of questions, the smaller ones are doing this. And B Corps can be on either side of the nonprofit for-profit line. You can have a B Corp that's a for-profit trying to focus on social missions. You're going to have a B Corp that's a nonprofit that brings in profit metrics. But you got to start asking the right questions and then grab examples from here and there and start to teach them. How do we start to think about local economies? I teach a case on Berkshires, a local currency in Massachusetts, and all the theory behind that, the philosophy behind that, because a local economy is a healthy society. If you buy a movie ticket at Lowe's or you buy a movie ticket at the local independent movie theater, to you it may look like the same decision. For the local economy, it is a very different decision. You go to Lowe's, all the money goes to headquarters. You go to Walmart, all the profit goes to headquarters. They may pay some money in taxes, but it leaves local farmers, small farms. They get replaced by big farms owned by Cargill. The money leaves. How do you keep the money in the economy? These are the kind of questions we need to bring in to get things to be more sophisticated about how the market works. And then the more questions you ask, you start to find answers, the horizon changes, more possibilities become visible. We need to start students on a journey because we don't have the answers right now. There is no holy grail sitting there for the answer. We need to start to ask the questions, find the answers, move forward. It's an okay answer to your question, but your question could be a subject for an entire conference on whether sustainability as an endpoint is impossible.
Thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, I knew that the question is not easy, but I knew you are capable to answer that. Yeah, we have some questions from the room. Sebastian, you are the first in the line.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and inspiring talk. My question is, it's really, I perfectly understand everything you said, but a firm is, in my opinion, some construct, some institution that has to, or that needs to achieve a kind of a goal. And of course, the better you set the goal as the owner or as the shareholder, whatever, the better you might achieve the goal, the more sense it makes. But the question is, the result is very often, and what's often measured is the shareholder value or whatever is the profit, the bottom line. And in a systematic way, we need to find some way to measure all the returns of a firm, not just the financial, but also the social and economic. But that's really complex, and there are guidelines of hundreds of pages of how to measure ESG goals. So how can we better measure firm performance?
Well, that's where everyone's struggling to, it's a constantly evolving process of developing different metrics. In 1997, John Elkington came out with the triple bottom line. And that was a very crude beginning to start to think about this. It has some problems. I can measure the economic. Even the environmental, I can put some numbers on it. Social is really hard to put numbers on it. How do we aggregate all three into a go, no-go decision? Are there times where I might put environmental or social above economic? These are some of the challenges and the questions. But I've been really amazed at the extent to which the corporate sector has adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as a new set of metrics to try and measure their performance. We also have the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI. And so people are trying to develop metrics to do this, but it has to go further than just a sustainable annual report. You have to connect it to CEO performance, reward systems, but then you have to embed it within the culture. And I recently finished a project. I'll put the web link in the chat, where some students came to me, and they were really feeling a loss of hope. That they're like, I came here to try and use business for positive change, and yet I feel like I'm embedded in a curriculum that just says shareholders are everything. And so I said, hey, I got an idea for you. I've recently started a project with Paul Pullman. Wonder if he'd be open to some interviews. And so these students did 3 interviews with Paul Pullman, and he really gets into it that you can't, if you really want people to really focus on what they're doing, it can't just be economic metrics. No one came to work today to say, how can I make money for the shareholder? No one came to work today to say, I want to make more profits for the company. What they did come to work today is say, they're a company that makes toilets. Are they there just to pump toilets out the door, or are they there to provide a sanitary way for people to take care of waste, particularly in developing countries? Are there ways to think about increasing hand washing and not just selling smelly bars? I mean, if you think about what we teach in organizational behavior, if we want to increase people's connection to their work, you connect it to the benefit for the people that they're providing for. I used to build custom homes. I didn't do it really just to build the homes. I really did it to satisfy the client. I worked very closely with the client. They were scared. They didn't know how to build a home. And it really was gratifying to me to provide to the home the value that they want. Scott Jeffrey put in there, Simon Sinek, start with the why, and that's it. The why is not to make money. The why is to serve. The example I have, if you have a sports team, I could use baseball, but a lot of people would use soccer, and you're interviewing for a new coach. And the coach says, I know how to make a great soccer team. Let's just score goals. You wouldn't hire this person. How do they build a culture? How do they build a team? How do they find the pieces of the team? Someone has to go, someone has to stay. How do you pull it all together? I heard a speech by a football coach. And he said, being a football coach is kind of like doing a jigsaw puzzle where you don't have the top. You don't know what the picture's supposed to look like. And there are some pieces that are missing, and you get some extra pieces. And you got to get rid of some pieces, and you got to find some other pieces. That's a good leader. That's what we need to teach. And so the ultimate objective here is really focusing on, why are we doing this? Why are we together? Because I also like to joke that I used to build homes, and they were designed by architects for a particular client, had a very artistic statement, and they were beautiful. And I have a colleague, Doug Kelbaugh, who teaches architecture. And he says, there aren't 3 pillars of sustainability, there are 4. You have the environmental, the economic, and the social, but you also have the aesthetic. In architecture, if it is not beautiful, people will tear it down and build a new one, or they won't use it. If you really want sustainable architecture, it has to be beautiful and it has to last. I used to teach a course on green construction. I said, tell me which one's a sustainable building. And I show them a brand new, state-of-the-art, ugly, modern, sustainable building. And I show them building in Rome that's been around for 2,000 years. You tell me which one's sustainable. I could go through a neighborhood and I can look at a house and I can tell pretty quickly, and I'll bet you can too, if it was designed by an architect to make something beautiful and lasting, or made by a contractor in order to flip it and make as much profit as he can and walk away. You can tell. And you're going to definitely tell in about 10 years when it starts to fall apart. So there's a long-winded answer to a very good question.
Thank you.
Sergey, you're muted.
Ibrat, it's your turn.
Thank you. Andy, I don't know where to start. You have so many interesting points you made. I've been taking notes and a lot of reflections. I guess maybe the one I would like to start with is the idea of wisdom.
Yeah.
I was really intrigued by you bringing out the idea of wisdom, and I would have loved for you to elaborate on that, which probably deserves a separate webinar in its own right. I like the idea of teaching wisdom and bringing and cultivating wisdom in business schools, but doesn't it sit somewhat in contrast to how we run business schools, or how we do research in business schools, in that we live in the knowledge economies, at least in the West, and we claim in the universities to pursue knowledge and generate knowledge. But in some sense, business schools are almost anti-wisdom in some sense. But particularly if you look by, the kind of things that graduates, the kind of careers pursued or the kind of decisions they make subsequently. I mean, in my own experience, when I was doing an MBA, I realized towards the end of the MBA, I began to read more and more liberal arts. Yeah. Because the MBA curriculum was beginning to make less and less sense in terms of how life actually works, I suppose. How can we, maybe my question is, how can we cultivate wisdom in business schools? And how do we overcome, if we can overcome this, this notion of the way we do research? Because in a way, what I'm discovering with the PhD process itself is almost also anti-wisdom in many respects.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, and it mirrors a question that Ignacio Pavez has put in there. We talked about teaching wisdom to students. I think there's a previous step to cultivate wisdom among academics. What do you think of the state of wisdom among academics? I'm not impressed with the level of wisdom among academics. I might ask any one of you, if you had a challenge in your life and you needed some advice, something that really mattered to you, it could be an issue around your career or something in your life, how many academics would you go to for advice? And if the answer is a small number, I might ask you why. And you would go to someone who is wise, not just someone who knows the literature. And so I think, Ibrat, to your question, at the beginning, you are taught to develop knowledge. Hopefully you've come into it with some degree of wisdom. I got into this game because I cared about the natural environment. I wanted to see the natural environment improved. That was my why. And then I learned the tools to write papers. That's the how. But the wisdom I developed over time as well. You'll know someone is wise in academia when they talk about issues of the day, and it's not always about data. It's not even in the jargon of their field. I remember the first time I got to meet Mayor Zold, who sadly has passed away, and I was just blown away by his wisdom. He saw the world through the particular lens, and he could understand it through that lens, and he didn't talk terms academics use to fake authority. Well, the literature says, which is an expression that drives me up the wall, because if you don't know the literature, especially if you're not an academic, you've just been silenced. Who's going to speak up and say, well, I'm not so sure the literature says that, because you don't know the literature. And let's face it, within academia, our literature fields are becoming smaller and smaller. So I'm in organizational theory. I focus on institutional theory. Am I up on the latest of everything going on there? Probably not. Am I up on what's going on in resource dependence theory? Definitely not. So if someone says, well, the literature, resource dependency theory says X, I'm done. I can tell you that here in Ann Arbor, there's a lot of locals who are hesitant to invite, the locals who are not connected to the university are hesitant to invite academics to dinner because they don't want to get lectured at. And someone who's truly wise listens as much as they speak and broadens their views. So to get back to the original question, start learning the trade. That's what you're doing as a doctoral student. The metaphor of a musician learning their scales. You're learning your scales, but don't lose sight of the why and get there. So you can produce a resume full of a bunch of different articles. Can you tell us what happens when you pull them all together? What wisdom does that provide? And is there an outcome that is a better outcome than others? When I first graduated, I did a dual PhD in engineering and business, which meant that my business professors on my committee kept saying, where's the theoretical relevance? And the engineering professors kept saying, what's the point? Which was a healthy tension. And I remember one time, the first talk I ever gave on my dissertation, it had business professors and engineering professors. And I finished the talk, and the chair of civil engineering, Raphael Bras, said, so is this a good outcome? And I was really uncomfortable with the question. He says, what's the problem, Andy? I study materials. I know the outcomes I want to see. That doesn't compromise my research. I'm a human being. I care about a certain outcome. Why can't you do the same? And I would ask every one of you. You can still have an opinion. You can still be a human being. That's your humanity. That leads to wisdom. Connecting to people outside the academy leads to wisdom. We need to constantly grow that. But at the beginning, you're learning how to develop knowledge. And over time, you'll apply it. You'll find you'll do that in the classroom. I describe it, you'll find your voice. There's going to come a point where you're going to realize you look at the world through a particular lens, which is another point. Choose your lens wisely. Somebody who studies politics and power usually looks at the world as a very political place. Someone who studies the idea of human being, there's been a lot of conversation about the term human resources, which to my mind has embedded within it that a human being is merely there for a transactional purpose, which I really loathe. And so if that's how you approach the world, that's what you see in the world. If your only tool you hold is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Broaden your perspectives as you develop over time. Develop that wisdom. Make it that a goal. Long-winded answer, sorry.
Thank you, Andy. And I think we have an interesting question from Ash. Ash, it's your turn. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for a great session. I don't know if you read the question I put, but it's related to the Berkshire you mentioned as a local currency in Massachusetts. I think there's also a Bristol pound in the UK. There's the beer in Switzerland. There's a lot of local currencies coming up. And of course, now there's the cryptocurrencies, blockchain, etc. How do you connect these together with sustainability, since companies now can issue tokens instead of issuing shares, and that goes also into blockchain? And I'm trying to think of how to connect that with Jack Fresco's work, if you're familiar with a bit of his work on resource-based economy. And I know there's a little bit of effort to tokenize natural resources in certain countries, especially like fishery, and it's like carbon trading. You give each fisherman certain tokens that they can use, or if it's in the mining industry. So there's a little bit of work there, but I'm not sure where I can do research on this or where to start as a PhD student.
But I think you're starting to articulate a very interesting research question. I'm going to begin by confessing I don't understand cryptocurrency. I don't understand Bitcoin. It's a mystery to me, but even just your question in the chat has really stirred my thinking. It's a really nice, provocative question. Because I can tell you that the argument around Berkshires, and it's driven by a group, you can look it up, the Schumacher Center for a New Economy. Mm-hmm. And their argument is that when you buy into the national currency, the national monetary system of the United States, it's like putting all your stocks into one company. And if that company goes down, your economy goes down with it. And so you can have all your money in US dollars, your economy run in US dollars, but if there's a drought in California and there's a crash in the price of food, your economy goes down with it. And so what they want to do is insulate themselves. And so it's a very rational approach. It's not, it's not really isolationism. It's about pragmatic diversification and reduction of risk. Once you put it in those terms, it's very interesting. And so if you can try and look at what's the logic behind local currency, and it's not just cool script, and it's not just tourism. There really is some deep thinking behind what they're trying to do, because there's other things that go with Berkshires. For example, They have something called import replacement. They recognize they can't make everything. They can't make cars, but should they be importing maple syrup? No, we've got maple trees here. We're making our own maple syrup. And we should be able to beat competitors because we don't have the transportation costs and the benefit of staying in a local economy. We should be able to make this work. Should we be shipping our wool out of county and back in the form of yarn or sweaters? No, we should make it ourselves. So then the third piece is productive loans. Not just a loan for any kind of business to get going, but a loan for a business that we can use to stop import replacement or to do import replacement. So the Mondragon Bank has been doing this forever. And that is the sort of the central organizing force to say, how do we have an integral, connected, vibrant local economy? It is not just handing Berkshires back and forth. It's actually having the businesses you need. So now everything that I've said, you could do an analysis of that and then take a look at cryptocurrency. And what does it do? I can merely ask these as questions because I don't know the answers because I don't know cryptocurrency. But it sounds like you've got a really interesting study. And I would add, by the way, if it's not just to have a great question. Someone told me once when I was doing my doctorate, the key to doing a doctorate is learning how to ask an answerable question. And every doctoral student goes through this. Their first question, nice try, you've got 10 questions. Tighten it, tighten it, tighten it. And then learning how to answer it. That's the whole purpose of a PhD. But if you can also study something that is really novel, that is really important, you are creating your brand, you are identifying something that people are going to look and go, the analytics are interesting, the theory is interesting, the empirical phenomenon is fascinating. How can we do that? And so I think get the wheels turning here, Ash. You may have something very, very interesting here. I don't know who else is studying cryptocurrency, but my generation doesn't understand it. If you can, and in fact, I would argue that no one really understands it fully yet because it hasn't played out. There's a lot of unintended consequences that are going to come out of this. Every innovation does. What are those? And if you can provide a lens to understand it, and perhaps even some recommendations for steering it in the right direction, you have something very interesting to study here.
If I may follow up on that, because you mentioned Mondragon, you mean Spain?
Yes.
Well, I had this brief discussion with my professor in the master's a couple of years ago, is that there's a conflict there because it's a cooperative, and how can you reconciliate the cooperative with the capitalist system? And the conversation stopped there, and I couldn't handle it theoretically.
Oh, you can find a way through that. There are different kinds of co-ops. There are ESOP. One of my beefs with business education also is we teach one form. We teach the shareholder corporation. And it embeds our thinking. I remember right after 9/11, we were all trying to figure out who is Al-Qaeda? What is that? And the Wall Street Journal the New York Times wrote a big article, and they had a picture of the organization of Al-Qaeda, and it looked like a Fortune 500 company. They had Osama bin Laden, he was the CEO, and they had the next layer and the next layer, and there's a pyramid. And I'm willing to bet with 100% certainty, the people in Al-Qaeda looked at that and just laughed. What a bunch of dopes. This is not how we're organized. But we don't teach about ESOPs. We don't teach about co-ops. We don't teach about B Corps. We don't teach about other ways of organizing. So, which airline is it? It's employee owned. I think it's United, Delta. One of them is employee owned. They're out there. There are co-ops out there. You can find a way. They're not antithetical to a capitalist system. There is no such thing as the capitalist system, a capitalist system. Keep that in mind.
Great, thank you very much. And may I chip in with yet another question? Andy, I'm an economist, so I know there's a fundamental problem in the sustainability and corporate responsibility. So we know there are benefits of sustainability and corporate and responsibility, but those benefits are extended. We know there are costs in sustainability, and the costs are almost immediate. Right, and we know there is a notion of utility preference. So £1,000 today is much better than the same £1,000 in 1 year. So from my perspective, we teach a lot, at least in Cranfield, we teach a lot the value things to the extent that some of our graduates are struggling to get jobs with $100,000 payroll per year. All right, so we probably don't teach them enough of the instrumental stuff to make their company prosper in the monetary ways. So I know that previously, as humans, we were addressing the problem of extended benefits and immediate costs by religion. So we were inventing religions which were inventing afterlives, and we were, inventing the systems which say to us, if you make wrong choices today and get the benefits today, you're going to burn in hell for eternity after life. All right, so can we invent any kind of religion today to address this kind of gap? All right, so most of us are pretty persuaded with the benefits of sustainability, but most of us are not prepared to pay the costs today without that fear of torture after life. What do you think?
I think that, well, to begin, your earlier statement that $1,000 today is always better than $1,000 tomorrow needs more context. What if I said that $1,000 today versus $1,000 in 10 years, but what comes with $1,000 today is assured climate change? Now, is that really a seriously degraded environment for your children and grandchildren? I think people have the wisdom to say, maybe that's not what we want. And so I think one more piece in your question is the certainty of the $1,000 today versus the uncertainty of climate change tomorrow. And that now we can start to chew on this. I think that one thing that I could add to my slides is the role of business in elevating the role of science in society today. We live in a time of what's called the post-fact world. The Rand Corporation has a study called Truth Decay, where they say that we debate facts, we blur opinion with facts, and we don't trust previously trusted source of information, otherwise known as the university. But many businesses understand science, especially those in the technical fields, and they live and die by science. They understand it. And I think they have a role to play in communicating that value into society in order to make a world that goes forward. At the end of the day, a CEO doesn't sit down with an Excel spreadsheet, run some regressions, and make the decision based on the highest p-value. They just don't. They make decisions based on wisdom, on experience, on judgment. And those attributes can start to come in and help us understand, for example, Paul Pullman. I mean, Paul Pullman didn't act like someone who just looks about maximizing shareholder value. He wanted to build a company that would grow in the long term, but have a broader impact on society. He eliminated quarterly returns because he thought people were focusing too much on the short-term metrics. He wanted to get more long-term thinking out there. And so is there a religion? Well, each one, all of us, I have it in the book. If I could find it really quickly. David Wallace Foster has a wonderful speech where he says, everyone worships something. You all worship something. I had a theologian tell me, I can tell you what you worship just by telling you how you devote your time. We all worship something. What is that we choose to? We all have a choice to it. What do we worship to? David Brooks warns, be careful what you worship, because that is going to guide the rest of your life. And if you just worship money, you will have a certain path. But if you worship something greater, it comes down to also challenging an idea that it's embedded within so many aspects of the business school that if it makes more money, it's good. And the objective is more money. It's even embedded within some of the rankings. Wall Street Journal ranking ranks business schools based on the average starting salary. We have a perverse idea within education now that we measure it by return on investment. That nauseates me. And we're turning our students into something. I'm on a committee for a scholarship for high school kids to get in college. I'm getting these resumes. High school kids are developing resumes for 5th grade. What are we teaching them? Your life can be measured on a piece of paper and it will be evaluated by somebody else. And that is seriously problematic. And so at the root of it, it's really, again, coming back to the why, your why. You have to decide what your why is. And if it's merely external metrics, whether it's money in the business world, whether it's A-level citations, citation counts and an H-index and the academy, I can assure you, you won't, when it comes to the end of your days, you're not going to feel comfort in that. You're not going to feel that was a life well lived, because there's always someone with more money. There's always someone with a higher H-index. But did you make a difference in the world? Did you connect to your sense of purpose? I love meeting people who make hard right turns in their life when they suddenly wake up to their purpose. I had a friend who was being groomed to be the CEO of the family company, and he was going to the Harvard Business School. And after the first year, he realized, this isn't what I want to do. I don't want to do this. And he quit and he became a cop in LA. I just love that story. And so, you know, I joke that if I produce this program to help students discern their career as in management as a calling, I'll know I'll succeed if some people leave business school. Because particularly at the undergraduate level, if you've ever seen the business school at the University of Michigan, it is a temple to wealth and power. It is beautiful, it's class, it's sleek, it's a shiny bauble for undergraduate students who look and go, I don't know what goes on in that building, but I want some of it. And they become business students. And then they look and go, well, I'm going to come up with a better salary. Any one of you can answer this question. If the number one metric for the career you chose was money, A, you won't be happy. B, you wouldn't be sitting here right now, because academia is not the career path to make yourself fabulously wealthy. I'm willing to bet most of you went into academia for something totally different, perhaps to make a difference in the world, to touch lives. That's what we're into it for. Business people aren't so different. They're part of society. They care about their family. They care about the community. We just need to bring that in. Again, the essay by James Campbell, look it up. It's in Medium. It's called The Most Important Issue of the World, I think it's called. Read it. He was a corporate attorney, and he just savages the environment we put business people in that compels them to act like sociopaths. That's explicitly what he says. It's a very interesting essay.
Thank you very much, Andy. Once again, a brilliant question, answer to an easy question. We have at least one more question in the room. Ignacio.
Hi, Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, I think my question is a follow-up question to your answer to Ibrat and also to Sergey, I guess. Is because, and it's based also on my experience as a junior faculty member. So I joined and I decided to study a PhD because I wanted to move to this path of wisdom. I thought that as academics, we can really make a contribution to create a better world. I was lucky that I joined a program where I thought my professors reflect that wisdom in their writing, in the way they approach scholarship. But when I studied in the United States at Case Western Reserve University, then I came back to Chile, and it's been hard for me as a junior scholar to really move from that space to really pursue this initial drive, which you put it beautifully in your presentation. So my question is, what could be your recommendation for junior scholars to want to move to that path of wisdom in their careers, and how to successfully navigate the academic environment to really move in that direction? So I would appreciate your thoughts about it. I have maybe other question about, for example, I think that we as academics are most of the part observers of what's going on. We try to understand reality, but we're not playing the role of activists in creating a better world. Yeah. So, and there are I think there are problems in terms of the research methods we use and how we see our role in society and in business. So I appreciate your thoughts about it.
Sure. The mere fact that you're asking the question is a good first start. This is something I've thought a lot about. To me, it's the difference between following a set of internally based objectives or externally based. There's always a mix of both. You live in a world and you must adapt to the world while also holding your own set of values in place. Deb Meyerson at Stanford has a concept called tempered radical. You join an organization, you can fit, you can force yourself to fit. Jackal wrote about this in Moral Mazes. But if you don't fit, you're going to become an alcoholic, you're going to become unhappy. Or you can leave and the organization never changes. Or Deb Meyerson says you can play the tempered radical. You're tempered, you fit. You're radical, you have ideas that are at variance. So in the academic world, what does it mean to be tempered? Well, you gotta publish your academic papers. I have another book called The Engaged Scholar, where I'm old and cranky now, and I'm tired of not saying the emperor has no clothes. And so I don't enjoy writing academic papers. I find the language twisted and contorted. I find it very turgid. I find they're very hard to write. But I look at them like cod liver oil. It tastes really bad, but your mother makes you swallow it because it makes you healthy. So academic writing, it's hard. It's really hard, but you got to do it so that you can be healthy, so you can be tempered, but don't lose the radical side. Keep that. And as you advance in your career, you're going to have more and more opportunities to bring that out. And when you become full professor, you have total liberty to do whatever the hell you want. And I'm not saying check out. I'm saying write what you want to write. I write less academic papers. I write more books now because books give me an opportunity to make a bigger statement, a longer argument, and I don't have those pesky reviewers to deal with. Because I also have a problem with what the review process has become. How many times have you gotten a review? And it seems more like they want you to write the paper they want you to write rather than editing or reviewing the paper you wrote. It drives me up the wall. So think about the career in your long arc. I'm going to drop something into the chat. There was a paper I wrote with A.R. Alongaban at the University of Victoria. And we took a poem by Yeats called Plato's Ghost, or What Then? And he walks through someone becoming successful in their life, and Plato keeps asking, why? What are you doing this for? It's the why question. And I think in academia, we steer you away from that why question. Maximize pubs, increase citation counts, publish only in A-level journals. That's not the road to a really impactful career. But at the beginning, you do have to do some conforming. And as you advance, you can start to adapt. A lot of people don't. A colleague said to me one time, Andy, one of the problems in our field is we get too many senior professors thinking like junior professors. They keep writing individual papers to keep adding lines to their resume rather than pulling it all together. I had a colleague one time suggest, what an interesting exercise. Once you became full, you had to take all your papers and you had to compile them into a book, and you had to write that book for a lay audience. That would scare the bejesus out of so many professors, but how it would change their worldview, how it would change the purpose of their work, hopefully. And so keep at it, focus on it. Over time, you keep asking the big questions. I personally think the more you engage with the world around you, bring your work into the real world, the better your questions are going to become. Because if you stay within the trajectory of the academic journal, particularly the A journals, they have a very narrow sense of what's considered legitimate research. Don Hambrick wrote about this, that we have a theory fetish. You can have a paper, wonderful explanation of the world around you. Where's the contribution to society? Reject. Or contribution to theory? Reject. And that's just warped. And the idea that I can only publish in 7, 8 journals, those are the only ones that matter, that's kooky. That's anti-intellectual. For the book, The Engaged Scholar, I was able to talk to Paul Krugman. And I said to him, why didn't you publish all the work that you got your Nobel Prize why'd you publish all in B journals? And his answer was, because the A's wouldn't take it. And he takes from that A's have a very narrow sense of what is considered legitimate research. The B's, and I hate the terms A and B, they're good and less good. No, A's are more theoretical, B's are more empirically focused, different audience. You can also, the opportunities we have right now to bring our work into the real world, the conversation, the monkey cage, Medium, there's so many outlets where you can write a version of your academic paper, put it into common language, bring it to the real world. You're going to get some feedback. Some of it's not going to be nice. I write about climate change. I have a folder for hate mail. Comes with the territory. Live with it. It'll thicken your skin, and it'll make your subsequent questions better. Mike Tushman once said to me, Andy, the reason business school professors don't want to present their work in the real world is because they're afraid they'll be told they're wrong. Don't be afraid to be told you're wrong. It'll make your questions better, more relevant, and you will develop that wisdom. Make that a path, and I think you'll find it. Long answer to a short question, sorry.
Thank you very much, Andy. And I think we still have time for one or two questions. So Ibrat has his hand up. Ibrat, it needs to be a very good question because there's a chance it's going to be the very last one.
Well, hopefully it won't be. It's a very interesting conversation, and I keep enjoying listening to Andy's ideas. I just want to go back to this notion of how we and what we teach in the business schools. And earlier you alluded to this idea of worshiping, and what you worship is a sort of, I guess, shows what's important to you. And it just reminded me of what I heard the Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who unfortunately passed away last year, say. He posed a question to an audience, what do we worship today? And people said different things, but he said, well, fundamentally what we worship today, at least in the Western societies, is self. We live in the age of hyper narcissism and what's in it for me and how do I benefit from it. And in a way, the business schools are placed in these societies. And Andy, you know better than me as a institutional theorist. What does this mean for business schools, in that how do we construct curriculum? How do we teach the aspiring business people who in many ways shape our lives and the lives of others in the society? What does it mean for our curriculum? How do we teach that so that they become perhaps open up to a different way of thinking other than pursuing the personal interest and personal gain?
Right. It's embedded in everything within your school. I mean, the last school I taught at, we had a big gala dinner, and it celebrated one of our prominent alumni. And he was the leading strip mall developer in the country. And I thought, really, that's our pinnacle. Is that, I mean, just because he makes money. And so, is there something higher than that? Yes. And so, who do we hold up as exemplaries in our business school? Someone put a comment in earlier. Everyone has a bad alumni. They talked about Trump and Wharton, and Michigan has its own. Is that who we hold up just because they make money, or do we hold up people that exemplify a higher set of ideals and aspirations for what is possible within business? And then what's embedded within the curriculum, and how do we help them? I use the word discern, because I can't teach someone their calling. I can't. You can't. No one can. It is an internally directed process. We can guide them in the experience, which is an interesting question, because the question I'm trying to noodle around with, and if you have thoughts on this, can undergraduates discern their calling, or are they too young? Do they have the maturity to do that? I think I can do it with graduate students. I don't know if I can do it with undergrads, but I'm going to try. But can we put them through experiences, exercises where they can discern their calling? I think that this focus on self is embedded in much more than the business school. It's embedded in society. What question have all of you been asked since you were very young? What do you want to be when you grow up? We're all asked this question. Really? Is it that simple? I want to be a Major League Baseball player. I can't play baseball, but that's what I want to be. And that's all that matters because that's what I want. No. And what if we ask people instead, what were you meant to be? That puts you on a whole different path of thinking. What were you meant to be? What are your innate skills? Where are your talents? And then what does society need? This is very different, a very different process. And, you know, David Brooks talked about resume values versus virtue values. Or I'm sorry, I'm screwing it up. Resume virtues versus, I'm gonna find it. I hate when I do this. I'm getting COVID brain. I'm not gonna be able to find it quickly. I won't be able to find it. But are you motivated by status, by money, by wealth, or you're motivated by something more? And David Brooks has his book, The Second Mountain, and he's kind of channeling Carl Jung. But you know, the first mountain is the mountain of status, about power, about success, about external validation. And we usually get to that mountain, the top of that mountain, and we look and go, this isn't it. This isn't where I want to be. And sometimes you get knocked off that mountain. He admits he got knocked off the mountain. Here he is, a national best-selling author, columnist for the New York Times, on NPR, on PBS, and then his wife divorced him. And he found himself in a crappy little apartment in New York going, what the hell did I do with my life? The second mountain is about relations. It's about connection. It's about purpose. It's about meaning. Carl Jung talked about this a lot. We euphemistically call it a midlife crisis, but that's missing the point. Because if you do go through this experience and you merely use it as an opportunity to buy a fast car, divorce your wife, and marry someone younger, that's not what it's about. But it is about really finding out what it's all about and why you're doing it. So, can we help business students skip the first mountain? Not so sure, because I think that's an innate drive in all of us. Is you know, we do have a need for accomplishment, to strive, to test our abilities. And how do we make them spend as little time on that mountain as possible? Put it in the curriculum, help them discern, expose them to people. And I would encourage all of you as academics, find academics that you see as role models and try and emulate what they do. I have mine in my life, and mentors as well. Mentors are so important. But I have one person I greatly admire. He's hugely successful. He's guru status. He's also wise. He's been described as a mensch, which is a great term. Things he does, he gives away credit easily, generously, and that is huge. I've been around people that, there was a joke when I was a doctoral student that if you walk by this particular professor's office door, he becomes a co-author on your paper. We can't stand people like that. This professor, he gives it away freely. He picks his friends by who he likes and who he admires, not by who have status within the academy. That's something else I admire. And so find people that represent those values you want to live, whether it's in business or in the academy, and see that that's something I aspire to. I want to be like that person. And it could be multiple attributes in multiple people. And if you can connect with them and be in their company and see how they think, it's going to make that all the more easy. So there's again, I ramble, sorry. Someone put down here, maybe beyond what were you meant to be, why not, what impact do you want to have? I think those go together. I think that I mean them to go together. What were you meant to be does ask a question, what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? Do you want the world to be better because you are here? How do you want to make that so? That does come down to what impact you want to have. And so I do see those connecting.